Welcome to Tentpole Trauma, the podcast where we look at movies that came with hype and high hopes, but left with crushing disappointment, either critically, at the box office, or both. Freed from the weight of expectations, we seek to examine these underperformers under a new light, parsing through the good, the bad, and everything in between with the hopes of gaining a better understanding as to why they failed to find their audience. Warning, there will be spoilers, so if you haven't seen the movie that we're discussing today, I suggest you stop the podcast and go watch it. Then when you come back and listen, you'll get more out of the discussion. On this episode, we revisit the Shawshank Redemption. Okay, I am Sebastian, and I'm here with Jennifer.
Hello.
And we are doing one of our Just the Two of Us special podcasts. It was Memorial Day weekend at the recording of this, and we decided to give the other hosts a break so they could enjoy themselves. The world seems to be opening up a little bit, so people want to go out and do things and don't want to just Zoom call on podcasts. Who figures?
Why wouldn't they just want a Zoom call forever?
In fairness, we didn't really even ask anyone because we just knew no one would want to.
Well, yeah, it's a beautiful weekend and people should be out and about. It's been a time. Yeah.
So we decided to do a podcast about a movie about prison and being stuck indoors. This week we are covering The Shawshank Redemption.
Woo!
The 1994 adaptation of Stephen King's novella, Rita Hayworth and The Shawshank Redemption. I believe it was originally published in the Four Seasons compilation book. I had that book as a kid, and I read, I think, The Body, which had been made into Stand By Me, also by Castle Rock Entertainment, the production company that made this movie, and Apt Pupil, which was also made into a movie later with Bryan Singer as the director and Brad Renfro as the star and Ian McKellen. But this was another one of the novellas. There's one other novella, I forget what it's called, but it's really weird. Nobody's ever tried to make it into a movie, but it's the only novella in that collection that hasn't been made into a movie. Anyway, this movie is a very famous movie that I think most people have seen, but what most people don't know is that it was not a hit upon its initial release.
I certainly didn't know that. I was shocked.
Yes, it was actually a big financial failure. It has since become so famous and beloved that I think they released it at one point and it ended up making its money back eventually, but its initial box office run was dreadful. It really did badly. And it was a $25 million movie, so I don't even think it made $1 million on its opening weekend. And we can talk about maybe why that happened. But like the film that we discussed last week, John Carpenter's The Thing, this is a redemption story because not only is the movie itself about a redemption, but the reputation of this movie has been redeemed, and it has gone on to be the #1 film of all time on IMDB ratings. It's #1.
I believe it. And some interesting trivia regarding the film's box office failure from IMDb is Warner Brothers actually shipped 320,000 rental copies to U.S. video stores. And this was a figure a spokesman freely admitted was, quote, out of whack with the film's performance in theaters.
Yeah.
But the film became the most rented video of 1995 and one of the highest grossing video rentals of all time.
Right.
So that's...
It also got nominated for a bunch of Academy Awards, so I think that helped to sort of boost its reputation on video, and then it got played a lot on cable, I believe on TNT or something like that. And it's just one of those movies that has grown and grown and grown in estimation and is now pretty much widely considered to be one of the greatest films of all time, or at least in terms of dramas. And, it's in the Library of Congress and all this stuff. So it just goes to show that even though your movie might bomb on your opening weekend, there can be still hope if your movie is good enough.
There's still redemption.
There's still redemption. People may find it one day and love it. This film is directed by Frank Darabont, who is a huge fan of Stephen King. Since this movie, he's done The Mist, and did he direct The Green Mile too?
He did. He directed and wrote The Green Mile.
Which was really a follow-up to this. I feel like they really tried to recapture that Shawshank Redemption magic with The Green Mile, and I don't think they were entirely successful, but nevertheless, it was a big film when it came out a few years later. So Frank Darabont is somebody whose name is closely associated with Stephen King. I think he would be considered the greatest adapter of Stephen King's work.
Also, I think Stephen King would agree because Shawshank Redemption is quoted as Stephen King's favorite adaptation of his work.
That would make sense.
Yeah.
Considering we know he doesn't like The Shining. So that would leave Shawshank Redemption pretty much out in front.
Right.
So, yeah, it's directed by Frank Darabont, who also wrote the script. I think he had the rights to the movie as early as like 1987 or something, but this movie didn't get made until 1993 and was released in 1994. And there was a whole bunch of people up for the role of Andy Dufresne, who is the main character, interestingly. There was Tom Cruise. I think he wanted Gene Hackman at one point. Kevin Costner almost did it, but he couldn't do it because he was making the film Waterworld, which may be being discussed soon on this podcast. Yeah, a lot of big names were up for the role of Andy Dufresne, and any others that you know of?
Yeah, Jeff Bridges, Matthew Broderick, Nicolas Cage, Johnny Depp, and Charlie Sheen.
Wow.
And Tom Hanks had turned it down because he was already committed to Forrest Gump.
Right, which was one of the movies that this was up in competition against. I can really see Tom Cruise. I mean, no, I cannot see Tom Cruise. Look, Tom Cruise can do anything.
No,
so
I know.
Who knows?
But it would just like seeing a much more actiony version of.
Well, that escape would have been something else.
That's right.
With Tom Cruise. He would have really escaped from a real prison. I could see Tom Hanks as Andy Dufresne.
Yes.
Very easily, especially as he is portrayed in this movie. But I'm glad that we got Tim Robbins because I love Tim Robbins.
Love him so much.
Yeah. Well, so I supposedly look exactly like him, so it
Identical
makes sense
twins.
that you love him so
I know.
much. No, really love Tim Robbins. I mean, he was not a big name or a big get necessarily. He'd been in movies, he'd been the star of some movies, but considering the other names that were up for the role, he was not a big name. Morgan Freeman plays the other pivotal role as Red. Now, in the novel, Red is an Irishman, which is why his name is Red. But they said, who cares to that, and cast it with Morgan Freeman, and I think they made a wise move there.
Yeah, it's one of his best.
Yes, he's very much the heart and soul of this movie. It's all told from his perspective, so it's really hard to imagine this movie without Morgan Freeman at the center of it. And he does a lot of voiceover in this movie, and I think that was sort of the beginning of the Morgan Freeman voiceover trend.
It was. I think this was his first time narrating a movie.
Right.
And then this kind of jump-started his narration or voiceover career.
Yeah, pretty much after this, if Morgan Freeman is in your movie, he's going to do some sort of voiceover narration at some point. There's even some movies that he's not even in that he does voiceover narration. Like I think the Steven Spielberg War of the Worlds has a Morgan Freeman narration in the intro, and he's not even in the movie. But yeah, this is sort of ground zero for Morgan Freeman narration films.
The only other thing I wanted to add earlier when you were talking about Frank Darabont having the rights for quite some time from Stephen King to make this was that this is, again, IMDb trivia said that Stephen King never cashed his $5,000 check for rights to the film. Several years after the movie came out, King got the check framed and mailed it back to Frank Darabont with a note inscribed, quote, "In case you ever need bail money, love, Steve." Isn't that awesome?
Yeah, that is
I
great.
just love it so much. Stephen
Well,
King is a delight.
he's an awesome guy, and he's given us many great, wonderful stories.
The other people that were actually up for the role of Red, because you were saying he is an Irishman in the story, were Clint Eastwood, Harrison Ford, Paul Newman, Gene Hackman, Robert Redford, and Robert Duvall.
Okay.
So that's some pretty heavy hitters.
So Gene Hackman was up for the Red role. That
Which makes
more
sense. That
sense
makes
because
sense.
he's
He's
older.
older.
But yeah, I'm happy with the two we got.
Absolutely. And it's also one of Morgan Freeman's favorite films, too.
I would imagine.
Which, I mean, how could it not be?
He is really the center of this. I mean, Tim Robbins is great too, but it's kind of Morgan Freeman's movie, really. He is the emotional heart of it for sure. When did you first see this?
Well, I was thinking about this earlier today because I've seen it so many times. I love this film so much. And I think because when I looked at the release date, like I said, it was in October of 94. So I probably did see it in the theater. I'm pretty sure I did. I mean, I was going to movies and I would have been old enough to see this in the theater because it's R-rated. So I probably did see it in the theater, but I've seen it so many times since, like on home video. Like you said, it was on TNT. You just know it so well. But then still, like watching it today, I'm still moved by it in so many ways.
Yeah.
And it's just great film.
It's a pretty perfect drama, I would
Yeah.
say. And I did not see it when it first came out. I was working in a movie theater at the time, and I remember it coming out. I think we had a screening of the movie in our theater, but we didn't actually show it. So I seem to remember popping in and watching a little bit of it. And I was like, oh, that looks pretty good. And then I didn't end up seeing it for whatever reason. Had it been playing at the theater I worked at, I would have definitely had seen it because it got like a pretty serious release. I was working in an art house,
Right.
so we got like art house movies. This wasn't considered an art house movie at the
No.
time. It was considered a big blockbuster drama, and so it didn't play at the theater I worked at. And I didn't get around to seeing it when it opened. There were other movies that were sort of stealing its thunder at the time, and so I didn't get around to watching it. And I don't think I got around to watching it many years later, and I think I might have seen it for the first time on cable or something when I was visiting my parents on a holiday or something like that, and it was on, and I just was like, "Oh, I'll watch that movie," and really liked it. Since then, I've sat down with it and watched it more seriously, but I think I remember seeing it first on TV. I liked it a lot when I saw it, and I've only grown to appreciate it more as time goes on. I don't know if I would hold it quite as high up as other people do as one of the greatest movies of all time, but I certainly acknowledge that it is a very good, powerful film. Now, since we are doing a movie that I think a lot of people are pretty familiar with, we won't belabor every plot detail
Of the 2.5 hour
of a
film.
2.5 hour movie like we usually do. We may be trying to get away from that format a little bit because I have gotten some feedback that people are like, you don't have to go over everything that happens in the movie, right? So we're going to try to loosen up maybe a little on that restriction.
Get loose.
It's a holiday.
Woo!
Yeah, we're partying.
Oh, yeah.
But we will go through it in a general sense.
Yes.
So the film opens with the trial of Andy Dufresne.
Mm-hmm.
It's in 1939, I think. It's late 30s.
Late 30s, yeah.
We see Andy. He's in his car. He's drinking. His wife is cheating on him with a tennis instructor.
Golf pro.
And this is being intercut with his trial,
Mm-hmm.
where obviously things have ended tragically, and he's obviously been pinned for the murder. Looks like he's gonna get put in prison because the lawyer, who's played by Jeffrey DeMunn, who is a regular in all Frank Darabont's movies. He's always in Frank Darabont's movies in some roles, and obviously this is a small part because it's just the beginning of the movie. But it seems like he's got poor Andy on the ropes because the wife has been shot. 8 times.
It was 4 times per lover, I think is what he had said.
Right.
I think. So it was a total of 8 shots. It
Right.
was 4 for each
So
person.
even if it had been a crime of passion, they're arguing that it's hardcore murder because he had to stop and reload to
It's
keep
excessive.
blowing
Yeah.
them away. So he's going to prison and it ain't looking good.
Nope.
So he gets sent to prison, and we are immediately introduced to our other main character, Red, played by Morgan Freeman. And Red is sort of holding court with his prison buddies, one of whom is played by William Sadler. I forget his name. It's like Hayward or something.
Mm-hmm.
And he's kind of the dummy of the Haywood.
Yeah.
He's kind of the dummy of the group, but it's a pretty fun performance by William Sadler because he's a decent guy, but he's a little thick, so he screws up things here and there. Another one of the cons that he hangs out with is David Preval, who you'd probably know from The Sopranos, if you ever saw it.
Richie Aprile.
Yes. And there's some other guys of note.
The man that we thought that on this watch we were like, is Ron Perlman in this?
Yeah, we
at
thought
first
it was
glance,
Ron
but
Perlman.
it's an actor. His name is Brian Libby. There's a couple other recognizable character actors that are in Red's crew.
So they're all watching the new prisoners getting brought in, and they see Andy being brought in, and like the way this is shot really sort of heightens Tim Robbins's height and awkwardness as he's being sort of let in on the chain gang, and they're taking bets on who's going to cry the first night. So you don't know that that's what they're doing at first.
They're betting cigarettes on like who, they're on who's their horse is what they're saying, and they're like betting each other a certain amount of cigarettes, but they don't. Yeah, it's not spelled out as to what it's for, but it's something along these lines.
Yeah, the important part of it is that Morgan Freeman sort of centers in on Andy for whatever reason. He's like that guy, and William Sadler picks this heavy guy as the one, and then the heavy guy ends up being the one who does cry that night.
Well, because William Sadler takes him there.
Yes.
But also just quickly, the way that I love the line that Morgan Freeman has when Andy catches his eye. He was like 8 cigarettes on that tall drink of water with a silver spoon up his ass.
Right, yeah.
It's just a great line.
Yeah, so that night, it's the hardest night of being in prison because, you're stripped and deloused with this horrible powder, and you have to sit there in your cell covered in awful powder and burning.
The prison walk to your cell buck-ass naked.
Naked, yeah. So that generally tends to break guys. And so William Sadler happens to be nearby his horse. And so he goads the guy into crying basically he's basically like, I'm going to show you around to all the good people. And, but it's really like, and they're going to rape you.
Well,
and
they're really going to like your big butt and all this stuff. Yeah, it's pretty bad.
So the guy ends up crying, and then the head prison guard, played by Clancy Brown, who could not be more perfectly cast as
the best.
A giant, awful prison guard.
So scary.
And I think this might be his most notable role.
Yeah, he's great.
Horror fans know him from many things, but this is probably his biggest dramatic role. So he comes and beats the shit out of the poor fat guy so badly that he ends up dying. So we see how horrible this prison guard is.
Well, and some other interesting trivia is that Clancy Brown said that he had received several offers from real-life correction officers to work with him in order to make his portrayal of Captain Hadley more realistic. He turned them all down because Hadley was an evil character and he didn't want to misrepresent real corrections officers.
Yeah, well, I think he represented them fine from what I know about correctional officers.
He's terrifying.
Yeah, no offense to any correctional officers out there, but you guys have a bad reputation. He's terrifying in the role. He is really intimidating. He does a great job at those things. And he's got that great Clancy Brown voice.
He's so great. He's so scary.
So the next sort of part of the movie is we see Andy trying to sort of acclimate to his new life in prison. At first, he really keeps to himself, which works out okay for him in one regard, but he gets sort of honed in on by this group of prison rapists called the
The
Sisters.
sisters.
And one of them is, I forget the actor's name, but he was in Aliens. He played one of the characters in
Yeah,
Aliens.
the character's name is, I think it's Boggs.
Boggs,
Was
yeah.
that right? Yeah, and his real life name is Mark Ralston.
Somebody I don't remember his name, but I've seen him in a bunch of movies. I think I even saw him in something recently. But yeah, he plays a really horrible, rapey creep, and him and his other rape buddies go after Andy. Andy does a pretty good job of fending them off, but he eventually succumbs to them because they gang up on him, and they just basically sort of terrorize him.
He's just repeatedly raped and beaten, and thankfully the film spares us
Yeah.
the raping part because we know that's what's happening, and a lot of times prison films go there.
Yeah, it does, but it lets you know.
Well, you know
for
what
sure.
no, you know what happens, but I'm just saying there's no question about it, but
Yeah.
I'm just saying we're not having to watch.
No.
Like there's always the shower scene or something terrible that happens in any sort of prison drama.
Yeah.
So we're spared that, is what I'm saying. But
It doesn't get graphic.
It doesn't
but-
get graphic, but that's what's happening. And yeah, he's just getting beaten and raped repeatedly. In the way that it's, told by Red's narration is, this is kind of what's going on for like the first 2 years.
Yeah.
Where it's not, it's not all the time, but it's, it's happening enough where it's kind of starting to break Andy's spirit, you can see.
Yeah. And time passes in this movie. We cover a long stretch of time. I think we cover almost 30 years.
Yeah.
So time passes and, you go into the next scene, but it's months later.
Yes.
Red is known as the guy in the prison who can get you things. He's that guy. Every prison has one. And so Andy comes to him with some requests. So they begin to sort of form a friendship.
The first time that they talk, and Red's been kind of keeping an eye on him from a distance, and Andy just is keeping to himself. Like he works in the laundry, he's fighting off the sisters, and he's just trying to just keeping his head down type thing. And so yeah, he comes to talk to Red, and the first time they speak is in the prison yard, which and this scene is great because they're just people are just throwing the ball around or whatever. In the trivia, it was saying that the scene took 9 hours to shoot of them just in the prison yard throwing the ball around. Morgan Freeman threw the baseball for the entire 9 hours without a word of complaint.
Wow.
He showed up the next day for work with his left arm in a sling.
Yeah.
That's not easy to do. I mean, it's hard. Just my softball.
Well, any repetitive motion's going to do that to you, but throwing a baseball,
Yeah. Anyway, but yeah, that's when they meet in the yard, and Andy's just like, I hear you're the guy who can get things.
Right. Initially, he wants a little hammer. It's like a chisel.
It's called a rock hammer.
A rock hammer. And Morgan Freeman's a little concerned about getting this for him because, for one, it could hurt or kill somebody. It sounds like he wants a weapon to defend himself with. Two, it sounds like something he could try to break out of prison with. But Andy's like, if you see this thing, you're going to realize that's ridiculous.
Right.
And so Morgan Freeman does get him the rock hammer, and it's like a little chisel.
It looks like a little tiny anvil.
Yes, it looks like a little tiny anvil
or like rock
with a
pick
handle
or something. Yeah.
Yeah, it looks like a little tiny pickaxe.
Yes. But it's small. And when he gets it, because they do show the scene of stuff coming in, and he's like got his network of comes in through the laundry, and this guy gets it and like passes it to him or whatever.
Well, it goes to Brooks, the librarian.
But it goes to the laundry.
Yeah.
And then Morgan Freeman, Red, gets it, and then he passes it to Brooks as the library cart goes by for him to give to Andy. But when he sees it, when Morgan Freeman unwraps it, he laughs to himself because it's like a mini pickaxe.
Yeah, and this is the scene where we're introduced to Brooks, who becomes an important character later. He's the oldest guy in the prison, or one of the oldest lifers, or not. He's not a lifer, but one of the oldest inmates. He's an old guy.
He's been there since 1905.
Yes, and it's now the late 30s at the beginning of this movie. And he basically handles the library, which at the beginning of the movie is this just shabby little room with 100 books or less in it.
And magazines.
Yes.
Yeah.
Andy gets his little pickaxe, and he and Red become friends. He goes to him for a couple of other things. He goes to him for a Rita Hayworth
Mm-hmm.
poster because all the guys are watching Gilda, the
Mm-hmm.
movie Gilda, and there's that great scene where Rita Hayworth flips her hair, and they all love that scene. And Tim Robbins is like, "Hey, can you get me Rita Hayworth?" So Red gets him a Rita Hayworth poster, which will be
Huge
important.
poster.
Yes.
It's like 24 by 36 for sure, like big poster.
Yeah. And he gets him some stuff for like rock polishing because Andy claims to be into polishing rocks or
Well,
whatever.
and he wants to create like a chess set and
Yes.
stuff too, where he's going to carve some things, and that's what he's into.
Yes. The next big major dramatic thing that happens is that they need to do some tarring on the prison roof. And at this point, Andy sort of ingratiated himself into Red's crew. So Red pays some guys off with cigarettes, and they all get to work the early part of summer retarring the prison roof. And while they're doing this, Andy, who used to be a banker and was a successful
Mm-hmm.
banker, overhears Clancy Brown's character talking about how his brother died, and he's awful about it. He's, the other prison guards are like, "Oh, I'm so sorry to hear about your brother," and Clancy Brown's like, "I'm not. He was an asshole," or
It's
whatever.
just terrible.
Just terrible. But the brother was rich and left him like $35,000. But Clancy Brown is like grousing about it because he's going to have to pay the tax man
Mm-hmm.
all this money. And
And then what am I going to do with that? Buy a new car, and then I'm going to have to pay taxes on that. And then I'm going to have to, then the kids are going to want me to drive them around. He was like, he's just so ungracious, like just terrible.
yeah, just looking a gift horse right in the mouth.
Right in the mouth.
And then Andy hears this and starts walking over to him, and the other guys are like, "Andy, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Like, do not go near him." I mean, this is a prison guard who kills people and gets away with it. But Andy walks over to him. When I was watching it this time, I was thinking, Andy, you could have come at this a little bit of a safer way. But he's like, "Do you trust your wife?" And Clancy Brown is like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "Can you trust your wife?" And like Clancy Brown grabs him by the lapels and like basically holds him over the edge of the roof, or like right at the edge of the roof, like he's gonna drop him off the roof. But then Andy's like, "No, no, if you actually can gift the money to your wife, you won't have to pay any taxes on it." And Clancy Brown's like, "You're making this up." And he's like, "No, no, you can call a tax attorney and they'll tell you
Call
what
the
I'm telling
IRS
you."
or
Yeah.
whatever.
And he's like, "I'll help you do this. And all you got to do is once the job is over up here, get the guys beer to drink on their last day on the
Yeah.
job." And so it works out. He does this for Clancy Brown's character, and the guys all get buckets of beer on
Coldies.
their cold beers on their last day of the job, which Andy got for them because he believes that, a man getting a cold bottle of suds after a hard day's work makes them feel human again.
Well, that's what Morgan Freeman's interpretation of Andy doing this is.
But he actually says that to Clancy Brown because he's like, "I think a man," like Andy says that to Clancy Brown.
I'm talking about when Red's like narrating what's going on, because Andy, the reason that because he helps Clancy Brown's character with the paperwork for
Right.
the tax stuff.
Yeah.
So the gift is, he says, "Get these guys some beers," or whatever. He follows through with it. He's just sitting over in the shade. Andy is
Yeah.
like just enjoying the shade, not having any beer. And Haywood comes over with a beer. He's like, "Hey, Andy, do you want a beer?" And he's like, "No, I gave up drinking," you know? And so, but he's just sitting there just smiling. And Red's like, you could think that Andy did that to, get some favor with the guys, to make some new friends.
Yeah.
Or, to get in maybe with the guard or whatever. He's like, but, I think he just wanted everyone to feel normal.
And that's something that comes in again later. He does a similar thing later, which is intended to make these people who are in prison and dehumanized feel like they're human beings again and that they are worthwhile. Interestingly, there's been a lot of Christian allegory put on this movie,
Oh,
not by Frank Darabont or anybody who made it, but like this scene has been interpreted as like kind of the Last Supper, because Andy is seen as like a Christ figure, and
wow.
whatever.
Okay.
Well, of course, that's what people do. That they do that with anything that's popular. They try to put Jesus onto it.
Okay.
But anyway, I can sort of see where you'd get that. And definitely Andy is a little bit of a Christ figure, and he has Christ-like moments throughout the movie. So it's not that big of a stretch, honestly.
That's me rolling my eyes.
Well, in fairness, Frank Darabont does not claim that to be the
Yeah.
case, and nobody else who works
Just
on
let
the
it be
movie.
what it is.
Right, nobody else
That's
who
all I'm
works.
saying. I'm like, whatever.
Well,
Anyway.
I mean, when stories like this resonate heavily with people, there's usually because they have some sort of archetypal worth,
Sure.
and there you can see these sort of things in the patterns of the story.
Sure.
Anyway, we'll leave it at that.
Because of what Andy did for Clancy Brown,
Yeah,
after that, he gets attacked one more time by
yes,
the sisters.
yeah,
And then he is beaten up so bad, not raped that time, but
yeah,
beaten up so bad that he's in the infirmary for a month.
yeah.
And then Clancy Brown kills Boggs.
No, he doesn't
Well, he doesn't
kill
kill
him.
him, but well, he doesn't kill him. Sorry, but he nearly does.
Yeah,
Like he can't ever walk again because of that. When he gets out of the infirmary, the warden was like, do you like working in the laundry? And he was like, no. And he was like, well, maybe we can find you something more suitable. So then that's when he goes to the library, and that's when the first guy comes in and was like, can you set up a trust fund for my kid?
Yes.
And then that's where all the taxes start getting done and everything. But it's because he comes to the library and he gets to work, because he's asking Brooks, he's like, you've been the librarian since how long? And he was like, well, I got here in '05. And he was like, I've been the librarian since 12. And he's like, have you ever had an assistant? And he's like, no. And so he's like, why am I here?
Yeah.
And then it's very clear why he's here, because like you said, he's good with money. So this is going to be kind of a setup where he's doing all the taxes for everybody and doing all their money stuff.
And yeah, the warden is played by an actor named Bob Gunton, who does a really amazing job at being kind of this horrible, self-righteous man. To the point about the Bible allegory stuff, he's a real Bible thumper.
Yes.
He quotes scripture and all this stuff, but we soon learn to realize that he is,
Full of shit.
full of shit and not a good Christian by
No.
anybody's definition. This actor is not an actor who achieved a great amount of fame. Well, he's shown up in other movies, but this is kind of what he's known for.
Yeah, I mean, but he's a recognizable face,
Yes.
and he's been in a lot of stuff. Like, I guess he was a character in Daredevil, the series.
Okay. Yep.
And he was a character on 24, the series.
He's in your favorite movie, Dead Silence.
He sure is.
So yeah, Andy is now basically doing taxes for all of the prison guards and like the prison baseball team for the other
visiting prison guards.
Yeah.
Everyone's bringing their W-2s.
Right. But sort of what comes out of this, which we'll play in later, is that he becomes this sort of valuable asset to the warden financially because he's got all these mad banking skills.
A couple things about Tim Robbins and his preparation for playing Andy. One is that he actually spent some time in solitary confinement to get a feel for it, even though he knew it wouldn't be the same because this was voluntary.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was one thing that was really interesting. Another thing that was really impressed Frank Darabont about Tim Robbins was when we first meet Brooks, he has like this baby bird in his pocket that he's rescued, that like fell out of the nest, and he named him Jake. And then, as you were saying, time goes by quickly for us as we're watching this. And when Andy comes to the library, we see Jake is now like a full-grown bird who's in there. And
he's like a crow or a raven.
I think he's a crow, or maybe a raven. But some interesting trivia about this was, and when Andy goes to the library, Jake is squawking, and Tim Robbins had to time his line of, hey, Jake, where's Brooks? So that the crow wouldn't squawk over him.
Huh.
Because the bird could not be trained to squawk on cue. So Robbins was able to time his line perfectly by learning the bird's squawking patterns.
Wow.
So like Frank Darabont was just like over the moon because I mean he was able to make it work with this bird.
Tim Robbins is awesome.
He's amazing. I love him so. He's such as like one of my favorite actors. He's just so great.
Because he's working so closely to the library, Andy decides he wants to try to help the library grow a little bit. So he starts this letter writing campaign to
The
like
Senate or something.
representative
He's like,
or something like that. And he says that he's going to write a letter every week,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Which he does. So he starts writing letters every week. And then eventually,
I think the next kind of major thing that happens is during this time, Brooks, we
right.
find out is Andy comes in to the library and Brooks has like a shiv against Haywood's neck.
Yeah.
And you kind of are thinking like, you know, he's an older man. Like, is this some sort of dementia episode or, you know, what's going on? And it's come to find out he's like, you know, this is the only way I'll get to stay.
Yeah.
And it's because he's been granted parole.
Yep.
And so poor Brooks, who's spent his entire life in prison.
Yeah, he's probably, what, 70 or 80
He's
at this
gotta
point?
be. Yeah, he went in as a fairly young man.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, in the trivia, which it's not shown in the movie or stated in the movie, but maybe it's in the short story or the novella, Brooks is apparently in prison because he had killed his wife and daughter.
Oh, jeez.
Which is brutal. Yeah, which is so interesting because he's such a beloved character.
It's not that in the movie. He says like I'm an old thief or something like that.
Yeah.
He didn't kill his wife and daughter in the movie because they know they would get no sympathy.
Oh
from
yeah,
that.
absolutely. But I think it might be in this.
It's probably in the
novella.
short story.
Yeah, yeah, they would have get no sympathy from him for that. Yeah, it was like over like a bad poker streak or something like that. He ended up killing his wife and daughter or something like that. Anyway, but yes, he's spent his entire adulthood in prison. And so now he's going to be released. And this part of the movie just kills me every time because it's just so sad. Like it's, you know, it's like just let him stay, you know, like he doesn't have any place out there. Like the world has gone and moved on. And then we have like Brooks's sad narration when he gets out, he's in his little sweet suit and he goes to this like halfway house.
Well, he almost gets run over by cars because when he went into prison, he'd only seen like one car.
Automobile. Yeah, because it was like early 1900s.
Yeah, and now they're everywhere.
And they're just zooming all over and they're like, watch out, old timer.
And he's like, the world just got in
such a hurry.
Yeah.
You know, and then like he's like at this halfway house and then they've got him put up with this job bagging groceries, but he's arthritic.
Yeah.
And he's an older man and it's just like everyone's like mean at the grocery store to him. Like they're just like really frustrated and he's just like he just wants to go and he's like it's a letter he's writing to the guys back in prison. He just wants to go back home is what he's calling it. You know, the prison. He just wants to go back home. Anyway, it's super sad. You know, it's going to a sad ending. It gets me every time. He goes and he gets up on a chair and he carves up in like the rafter or whatever. Brooks was here.
Yep.
And we see it after he's hung himself.
Yep.
It's just the worst. It's just like talking about it. I'm like getting teary because it's like totally like pulls on the heartstrings.
Right. And it also sort of foreshadows what Red feels is coming for himself.
Sure.
Because Red knows he's going to be in there a long time. Throughout the movie, we keep having these little scenes where Red goes before a parole hearing and gets rejected every time, even though he tells them, like, I've reformed and all
I'm rehabilitated.
I'm rehabilitated, but they always reject him. And Red talks about how Brooks was institutionalized, and that means that, you know, at a certain point, you're in prison for so long, it's the only world you're capable of existing in, and you really can't go back to the real world because you just don't have any place in it.
Nope.
And I'm sure that is something that many prisoners feel and relate to, and it's a terrible thing that happens to people who have gone through the system and who have been in there for a really, really long time.
So after that, though, some good news comes because Andy is, you know, running the library because Brooks has left. He finally, and again, it's like time has passed because one day he comes in and there's like crates everywhere. And, you know, Clancy Brown's like, get this shit out of here. I don't know what this is. And they like gives him a letter and it's from this senator or whatever government agency he's been writing. and there's like a $200 check in there, and they're like, and we've sent some books and media that was donated. Please stop writing us letters.
Yeah.
like that, because they're like, and he's like, and Andy's just like, wow, it only took 6 years.
Yeah.
Now I'm gonna write 2 letters a week.
Yeah.
It's just great.
And one of the things they've donated is a record player.
Yeah.
And some albums. And while the guys are out in the yard, Andy's putting away some of the stuff. There's this prison guard who is actually kind of nice to him, but he's like, "Get this stuff all packed away, Andy. I'm going to go pinch a loaf. And then when I come back, I want all this stuff squared away." So he goes off to the bathroom, and Andy finds this record player, and he finds this album of an opera. I forget what opera it is.
It's Mozart's The Marriage of Figaro.
Oh, it's Figaro. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he finds this album, he puts it on, he starts listening to the music, and it's a very beautiful opera music, and he gets this idea in his head because he's right near the prison intercom microphone.
Because he's in the warden's office.
Right, he's in the warden's office, so he locks the poor guy, poor prison guard who's nice to him, in the bathroom. He locks himself in the office, and he takes the microphone and puts it by the record player, and he lets the beautiful Mozart music play out all throughout the prison and into the prison yard. And you get this scene where the men all stop and listen to it. And it's sort of this moment of Red talks about how beautiful the sound is and made them forget that they're where they are, that there's beauty in the world and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, he says something along the lines of like, Red says, I don't know what these 2 Italian ladies are singing about, but it's just, it's just beautiful. Like he's like,
it made you believe in places that weren't behind stone walls and that kind of stuff. There's a lot of talk about stone walls and what that means, and as a metaphor that is used both literally and figuratively in this movie. But this doesn't go over well with the warden and Clancy Brown, and they break into the office and put Andy in the hole for 2 weeks or whatever.
Yeah.
But it was all worth it to him.
Oh, yeah. He came out with a smile.
Yeah, he comes out smiling, and the guys are like, "God, how can you be like happy?" And he's like, "Well, I was just hearing the music in my head, the whole time." And he talks about how they can't take away what's in your mind, no matter what.
And it's an important conversation because it leads up to something later, between a reoccurring theme between he and Red, because he's like Andy's still like saying you can't give up hope, you have to have something, and Red's whole thing is like these are pipe dreams, just make the best of where you are type thing. And it's and then Haywood, the character, is like, "Couldn't you have played some Hank Williams?"
Yeah.
And he's like, "Well, I was getting ready to take some requests, but they busted down the door."
Yeah, the theme of holding on to hope is obviously the kind of main theme of the whole movie. It plays in, very importantly in the climax, but it's this, Red thinks that hope is dangerous. When you're in a situation like this, where you're in prison, where your life has been completely taken away from you, you really can't hold on to hope because that's only going to break you. That's sort of Red's point of view. But Andy's point of view is that no, you have to foster it, you have to keep it alive, however you can do it.
That's all you have.
Right.
And going back to what you said earlier, actually, that would be part of like people relating some sort of Christianity to this because of
you either believe or you don't.
Yes.
Yeah,
which makes sense.
You could say that hope was faith and use that.
Yes.
But, we're not going to do that.
No, we're not saying that.
Yeah.
But
anyway,
you
could. One could if one wanted to see that in the movie.
Yes.
What's
so then the next event that happens is we get a new batch of prisoners coming in.
Mm-hmm.
We get, and time is passing again. Like the library's first we get the library getting spiffier.
Yeah, Hayward gets his Hank Williams.
He gets his Hank Williams and he's singing along in the library. Library looks great. It looks way better because now now Andy's gotten, because he keeps writing these people, they now have agreed to give them like annually like $500 or something like that.
Yeah.
So like they have real money coming in for the library. Library looks like a real library now.
Yeah.
And Andy is also helping guys get their GED.
But he's also helping the warden funnel
Oh
money
yeah.
into all, because of this money that Andy's bringing in. The warden is now using money to pull shady shit. He's keeping highways from being developed because he can outbid all the contractors
Contractors.
with prison
So
labor.
then they're
And
like
so,
paying him off to like not take the jobs so they can
yes,
still work, or he's like getting, as Andy says, like kickbacks upon kickbacks from kickbacks.
right. And Andy explains to Red at one point, which is important, that he's created, because Red's like, this is all going to blow back. Somebody's going to find out about all this eventually. And Andy's like, no, they won't, because I created this whole fake person who this all is going to lead back to, and they'll just trace it to him, and he's not real.
He's not real. He only exists on paper, and he's like, it's amazing what you can accomplish by mail.
Right.
So he's been able to like create this phantom person who has a driver's license, has a social security card, like has all these bank accounts. And
Yes.
so, yeah, he's laundering the money and he's doing it in this way. And so, yeah, that's all going on. Things are humming along now.
Yes.
Andy's helping everybody like get their high school diplomas or GEDs. And then we get a new batch of prisoners coming in which we have Gil Bellows.
Interestingly, this role almost went to Brad Pitt, but Brad Pitt had just had Thelma and Louise, and he thought he was too big for this part, so he didn't take it. Which is probably true.
Yeah, it is
he
true.
Probably
He
was
would have
too
been
big.
fine too, though.
He would have been, but he didn't need to be.
No,
there.
he didn't. But Gil Bellows is great.
Yeah,
like,
he does a great job.
And this was like his time, because this was Ally McBeal was
Right?
around this
Yeah,
time, and that
a
was
little
what he was-
later, but yeah.
But yeah, that's what he was. He was big on. But yeah, so they get the new crop of prisoners coming in, and he kind of looks like Elvis in the sense of like kind of like a Stephen King's Greasers.
Exactly. I was going to bring that up. This is the rare Stephen King greaser who's actually a good guy.
A good greaser.
Yeah, usually in Stephen King stories, he's very afraid of greasers. He was clearly terrorized by greasers as a kid, and so they usually are these figures of fear and
they're always the nemesis.
bullying, or straight up they're demons. It just depends what it is. But in this case, Gil Bellows' character is actually a nice greaser.
Good greaser.
Yeah, the guys like him because he's a wise ass,
Yeah.
but he's, the kind of endearing wise ass.
Well, and he's young, it's like he's totally likable, and he just talks a good game, and I think they're just happy to have some like fresh young blood in there too, that everyone in the group likes him. But Andy's kind of a little wary of him because he's done like multiple stints in prison, like everywhere.
Yeah.
Like little short stints, but like for, not murder or anything, but like a lot of like stupid
Petty
robbery,
theft.
petty theft.
Yeah.
And he's not like, and Andy makes a comment, something like, you maybe should think about another career. You're
he's
obviously
like, "You're not a good
Not a
thief."
good thief because you keep getting like caught.
Yeah.
And he's like kind of offended a little bit. Gil
Yeah.
Bellows is, and then he kind of it turns into a joke, and everybody's laughing and it's fine. And he comes to Andy in the library and he's like, I heard you've been helping guys get their high school equivalency or GED, whatever. And so Andy's like, yeah. And he was like, well, maybe you can help me. And he's like, only if you're serious. And and we come to find out that the character is Tommy, that he's playing Gil Bellows.
Right.
That he he's like, I can't really read too good. And Tim Robbins is like, Andy's like, you mean you can't read well? You can't read very well. He's like, we'll get to that.
Yeah.
But he totally helps him learn how to read, like goes back to like ABCs and, sentence structure and nouns and verbs, and gets him through the whole thing. And then we cut to him taking the test, and, Tim Robbins has to time the test, and he's done, but Tommy hasn't finished the test, and he just has like a meltdown, which I thought was also great because he's like, there's a cat up the tree and this and that, and 5 times 5 is 25. And I'm like, it is. Like, you got it.
Yeah.
And anyway, he throws his test away and leaves. And you see Tim Robbins getting the test out of the trash, and kind of know where that's going to go.
Unfortunately, things go bad for Tommy. Because Tommy has been in all these different prisons, he recalls an incident he had with one of his cellmates, where the cellmate was describing a murder he committed that sounds exactly like the murder of Andy's wife and her lover. So Andy is convinced that this guy is the real murderer and he's innocent. So he goes to, which he knows he is. He knows he's innocent. But I mean, it's been a sort of this running gag that when Andy got to prison, Red asked him, did you do it? And Andy's like, no. And like Red's like, don't you know we're all innocent here?
Right. And Red's like, I'm the only guilty man in Shawshank,
Right.
actually, because he like Red has admitted to his crime.
Right.
But everybody else is, it's the running gag. Where, nobody did what they did. My lawyer screwed me. This
Right.
and that and the other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So nobody's really believed at this point that Andy didn't kill his wife. They all just think he can't admit it to them. But it turns out that he really didn't do it, that this guy did it and he got the blame for it. And so Andy goes to the warden and
his buddy that he's been helping out with everything.
Right.
It should go fine.
Right. And he's like, I need to go pursue this. I need to, whatever he needs to do to try to, whoever he needs to contact to get a retrial. But the warden's like, at first he's like, I can't believe you fall for this, that this guy would tell you this. And Andy's like, what are you talking about? And the warden keeps basically putting him off. And then Andy's like, why are you being obtuse?
Yeah.
And the warden's like, what did you call me? Which I think is funny because I think the warden doesn't know what obtuse means at that point.
I thought so too.
Yeah, but he just thinks he's insulting him.
Yes.
And he basically has Andy thrown in the hole because Andy starts to get more and more worked up. The warden doesn't want to let Andy go because Andy knows too much.
Well,
Andy's helping him with all these illegal things.
And then Andy makes the grave mistake of saying, like, he's like, if I got out, I would never talk about what's going on here.
Right.
And that's just like that's just the nail in the coffin.
Yes.
Because then he comes unhinged because this is not something we speak of.
Not Andy's smartest moment in the story.
But he was just like spinning. It's like the warden is just shooting down everything he's saying. He was like, no, but the guy who was Tommy's cellmate he had been working at the golf club and casing the whole scene there.
Yeah.
So there would be record of his like pay stubs. There would be a way to track this guy. Like Andy's just like, yeah, we could find him. Like this could happen. Tommy says he'll testify. But then the last thing he says, which just seals his fate of going into the hole for a fucking month, is because he says I won't talk.
2 months.
Well, no, but it's 1 month and then an additional month.
He gets 1 month and then they have a scene and then he gives him another one.
Yeah, so it's 2 months total. But yeah, so the first time though, it's because he has said, I won't talk about what's going on in the prison. So then we just see him in the hole for, it's just forever. And like, we do get one of the guards who's nice comes by and tells him, hey, the kid passed his test. I thought you'd want to know because that was a really happy moment.
Yep.
And we get to see Tommy celebrate or whatever with, the guys are all excited and it's a sweet moment, but not to last.
No, because Tommy gets called out one night. Like, I think he's out by the prison gates or something.
Well, they tell him to go meet, the warden wants to talk to him outside, like in the yard.
Right. Which is,
at night.
Is not a good thing because why is he now outside in the yard at night? And, the warden is there and he asks him what he told Andy and gives him a cigarette. And he's like, would you be willing to testify to this in front of a court and the presence of God and all that?
Well, he also, like, leading up to that statement is just talking about how, like, wow, this information's really been keeping me up at night and I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
And all of this. Like, he's, like, really, like, setting the scene of, like, that this is really weighing heavy on him.
If you ever find yourself in a moment like this where somebody's having this kind of conversation to you in a dark place, just run.
Yeah.
Like you're
well.
screwed. Yeah, you're not. It's a very sort of mafia-like scene.
Felt very
Sopranos or something.
Yeah.
Like, hey, are you going to testify? Like, would you testify if somebody's asking you that in a dark place? Just say you wouldn't do it.
Or Tim Robbins and Mystic River.
Right.
That's what I was thinking of. I was like, this is just bad. Don't go out there.
Not the time to tell the truth.
No.
But Clancy Brown is hiding up in a crow's nest or something and shoots Tommy dead.
Yep.
In cold blood right there.
So Tommy's dead, and then that's when the warden stops by the hole.
Yep.
And he's like, certainly you've heard at this point about Tommy. It was a tragedy. Who knew with only a year left that he would try to run?
Yeah.
And, he just knows.
Yep. And Tim Robbins is like, or Andy is like, I'm not going to help you anymore.
Yeah.
And the warden's like, oh, you're going to help me. We're going to go right back to the way things were.
He's like,
And
or I'll shut the library down and we'll have a old fashioned book burning. And all,
yeah,
I mean, just like starts threatening him with everything. Like, just terrible.
yes. And then he gives him another month to think about it.
Yeah. Oh, then he's like, oh, and that protection from the guards is going to go away and
Yeah.
all this stuff. Like, it's he's just terrible.
Yeah.
Like, you think in the beginning, like, the warden's an uptight, bad Christian, phony Christian type
Yeah.
or whatever, and he sucks. But you really think that, like, Clancy Brown is the worst.
You're right.
And it's like, no. The
No.
warden is the absolute worst.
Right. He's a different kind of evil. But they both
They both are
represent
bad. Yeah.
Well, they very much are like, you've got the brutish henchman and you've got the evil mastermind.
Yes.
And
Yes.
They're sort of archetypal
Yes.
evil characters, which is why I think they're really effective.
Oh, yeah.
So Andy gets out of the hole and he's got to go back to doing things the way he did before. But we really get the sense at this point that he's sort of broken.
Yes.
He's just kind of sitting there in the yard and Red comes over. That's sort of where they have their conversation about hope and all that. And Andy's talking about there's this place, he talks about this place in Mexico, which is near the Pacific. If you go there, they say the water's so beautiful that you forget your past and everything.
The Pacific Ocean has no memory.
It has
I think
no
is
memory.
what they say about it.
Right. But they're talking about a place you can go where your
Yeah.
past isn't there to haunt you anymore.
Exactly.
And this is when Morgan Freeman's like, this is dangerous types of thinking. You can't have this kind of hope.
And this is when Andy says, get busy living or get busy dying.
Right,
Which is a famous line.
Which is one of the most famous lines from the movie.
And then Red starts to walk away, and then Andy's like, Red, if you ever get out, like, I can you do something for me?
Yes.
And Red's like, sure. And Andy tells him specifically about this spot in Buxton, I think it is,
Buxton,
in Maine.
Yeah.
He's like, if you ever been to Buxton, it's the place with like this beautiful oak tree. It's by the biggest hay bale or whatever. And he gives him very descriptive directions as to
like,
where this spot is.
Follow this like stone wall,
Yeah.
and then you'll find a stone that doesn't look like it belongs
volcanic,
there. Yes.
like glass type stone.
Look under the stone.
Look under the stone. But this is the tree where I proposed to my wife. And he's also he's talking to Red. He's like, I should have been a better husband.
Yeah.
I didn't pull the trigger, but in a way I got her killed because I was, I'm a hard man to know. I should have been more open with my feelings. That's why she went to someone else. And, just kind of like the chain of events that happened. He feels that he's responsible in that way.
It's actually a really complicated, dramatic scene. And I think it's one of the reasons why this movie is so highly regarded and so successful. Because, you listen to us talking about it now. We've brought up like 3 different major things that sort of happen in the scene. But the way it's written is so elegant.
Yes.
Like it all flows perfectly together that you get Andy's confession. Like, and this is his moment of being like, it was my fault, and I'm to blame. And Red's like, it wasn't your fault. You're guilty of being a bad husband.
Yeah.
There's things you're guilty of, but you weren't guilty of murder. And then, it seamlessly goes from all of these different points. And that's really difficult to do, to write a scene that is serving this many major parts and being really dramatic at the same time. It's a really elegant, beautiful piece of dramatic writing. And it has that great line, get busy living or get busy dying. It ends on that. It's just, from a writing standpoint, it's just perfect.
I can't think of a better way to say it than how you just did, that it's just elegantly executed.
Yeah.
It's just perfect.
Yeah. It's a moment in this movie where I feel if you're into drama and you can appreciate well-written drama. The whole movie's been good, but this is the moment where you're really like, okay, this movie is very well written, because that is not easy to do. Very few movies manage that tightrope walk of information, catharsis. The theme of the movie is being encapsulated there. It's very, very, very good scene. And this is sort of the last moment between these two characters.
Because Red goes back to the guys,
Yeah.
and they're like eating together, and in the cafeteria or whatever. And Red's like, I'm worried about him now. Like, we need to keep an eye out on him or whatever. And Haywood's like, it's just so great. He's like, well, he stopped by the shop or whatever.
Yeah, Hayward works in the shop or whatever.
Yeah, and he's like, he stopped by the shop this morning and told me he needed 6 foot of rope. And he was like, so I gave it to him. And they were just like, what? And he was like, well, why wouldn't I? And everybody thinks like, oh my God, it's going to be like Brooks, or, he's going to hang himself. And everyone's just like on like watching Andy, and meanwhile, we get Andy in the warden's office or library, like finishing up, the warden's like, I want to go home soon or whatever. And Andy's like, I'm almost done here.
Lickety split.
Lickety split. Yeah, he's such an ass.
Okay.
And he's like, Andy's like, I'm almost done, sir. And he's like finishing up this nightly deposit every night where he has to hand the checks to the warden, and then the warden puts the books,
ledger.
The ledger goes into the safe, which is behind this. I was teasing Sebastian earlier. I was like, I'm going to put these all around the house. Yeah. These like faux crocheted like horrible Bible quotes or whatever, and so that's hiding the safe anyway. So he puts that in there, and then of course the warden's like, because he's like his assistant, is take my laundry down, and I want my shoes to shine like mirrors. And so we see Andy just shining the shoes, and then we see him doing the slow depressed walk back to his cell. You're
really being sort of led to think that Andy's going to kill himself. But the next morning comes, and they open up all the cells, and Red says, like, it was the longest night of my life because he's expecting Andy to be dead. They open up the cells, and Andy doesn't come out of his cell, and the prison guard's like, get out to friends, and like, you're wasting my time or whatever. They go over to Andy's cell, and Andy is not in his cell.
Vanished.
He's just straight up gone.
Vanished. There's nothing. He's just not there.
And the warden comes in and is just freaking out, and he's like, where is he? Where is he? He couldn't have just vanished. He's having a fit. He's taking the chess pieces that Andy's made, and he's like throwing them at people. Like he has Red pulled into the cell because he's like, I know you or him are tight.
Thick as thieves.
Where is he gone? And Red's like, I honestly don't know. And like, so he's throwing these chess pieces around, and then now it's Raquel Welch on the wall because Andy has upgraded his.
It was Rita,
pin-ups.
Then it was Marilyn Monroe, and now it's Raquel Welch. It's another life-size poster.
Right. And so the warden throws one of, he's like, and
fuzzy britches.
Yeah.
She's in her like BC outfit.
Like, it's a conspiracy. They're all behind it. You and her and fuzzy britches over there. And he throws the piece at the poster, and it goes right through the poster because there's no wall behind it. And they pull down the poster, and Andy has chiseled away a hole through the wall.
That's right.
With the little tiny
rock hammer
that he was been given, because on one of his first nights at the prison, they do a sort of flashback where you see Andy, one of the first nights he was there, and there's sort of like, he could see that somebody had sort of tried to carve their name in the wall, and so he starts to carve Andy, but then part of the wall chips away, so he realizes that it's actually pretty soft rock. And then so, over the years, he's just been chipping away and then putting rocks in his pocket and then going out into the yard and dumping it through his pants in the yard. And he's carved a hole all the way through the wall, and it's thick. It's like, it looks like he's got to crawl through there. It's at least, 10 feet thick or something.
Yeah, he's just working on it every night for close to 30 years.
Right.
And it's like this little rock hammer, so it's not noisy.
No.
I mean, he's just able, and Red had made a joke in the beginning where he was like, when he saw the hammer, he was like, oh, it would take you like 600 years to get out with that.
And he's like, nope, it took about 30.
20 or 30, I don't remember how long it was at that point. Yeah.
But I mean, also fortuitously for Andy, there was a thunderstorm the night before. So he's crawled through the wall, but then he's got to go down, and he's now in like this sort of, in between space in the prison where there's piping,
Mm-hmm.
and he's got to smash into a sewer pipe, which he does, timing it to the thunder crashes. And he smashes through the sewer pipe and then crawls through, as Red describes, 500 yards of shit to come out a sewer pipe out into outside the prison. And this is all being narrated by Red, describing what Andy did. The rope was used because he had the prison ledgers in a jar tied to him, because he had faked the prison ledgers he had given to the warden. He'd actually put a Bible in there instead of the ledger with a nice little inscription on it. He's also got the warden's dry cleaning on underneath his clothes.
Well, I think he put it in the bag, because I noticed that when he came out, and he gets that famous scene that you get, where he strips down.
Yes,
he just takes off his prison clothes. I think he smuggled them out.
He smuggled them out under his clothes, and then he put them in a jar.
Yeah,
something.
Well, he had like a bag. It was like a jar, a bag that was tied to, like, waterproof bag. That was tied
something
to his
that was tied to his ankle. Yeah, and when he comes out into the mud after he's gone through the sewer pipe, we get the famous.
Yeah.
It's raining, and we get this overhead shot of him.
And he's taking off his shirt.
Very Christ-like. He's making the Jesus Christ pose. Baptism of water upon him. The healing baptism of water. But yeah, he's got the warden's clothes, and so, he makes it into town with his nice shiny new shoes and his suit. And he goes to the bank and he assumes a fake identity that he's made.
The Phantom comes to life.
Yeah, the Phantom comes to life, and now Andy is this person.
And he's cashing out at every bank in town.
Yeah, every bank in town.
And to the tune of about $370,000, which, especially at that time, is a lot.
Huge. Yeah, that would have been like the equivalent of $1 million or more at that time. So yeah, he gets all the money and disappears and is not found again.
Well, and that's the last we see of Andy.
Yes. And then he sends a nice little package to the press.
Well, yeah, but that happened. Yeah, that happened at the bank. So when he was at the bank, the last thing that he said to the bank teller was like, "Can I help you with anything else?" He's like, "Could you put this out in today's mail?"
Right.
So that's how it gets to the Portland Daily Bugle or something like that.
Right. So this ledger goes to the Portland Daily Bugle. They realize the corruption the warden is guilty of, plus the murder that Clancy Brown is guilty of. The warden sees this in the paper. He goes to the safe. He opens the safe, and in it he finds the Bible. That is not the ledger, but the thing that Andy substituted. And in it is written in a quote like, "You were right, salvation was within." Because at one point the warden had said to him that salvation was within the Bible.
Yes.
And the warden opens up the Bible, and there's a little cutout of where Andy hid his chisel thing. And then the police come for the warden, and he blows his brains out.
Yep, and they arrest Clancy Brown, and apparently he's crying like a baby.
Yes.
Because now he's going to prison.
I kind of wish we saw him in prison.
I know. It would have been great. So, yes. So then that's the last we know about Andy. And then we just see the guys at lunchtime or dinner or whatever, and they're sitting around, and they just like to really reminisce about Andy. And, it just makes them feel good. And it makes Red happy, but also a little sad, because he's like, "I just really miss my friend."
Yeah.
But, I'm happy that he got out, and that's just, he has a whole allegory about, some birds weren't meant to be caged.
Yeah.
And you just have to let them fly because, their colors were too bright or something like that.
Their
and
feathers are too
bright. Yeah. And it's very sweet. And he's just like, mostly I think I just miss my friend.
Yeah.
Red got a postcard that doesn't have anything written on it, but the postmark is from somewhere in Texas, Fort something.
Wherever Andy crossed the border
crossing
to
is.
Mexico.
Yeah.
And Red's like, "I like to imagine Andy in the car that he bought with the money."
Yeah,
Right?
convertible.
We got a shot of Andy just driving
along the
Pacific.
Yeah. So then Red's up for parole again. And now Red just gives 0 fucks when he goes to the parole board, because he's tried for it's every 10 years.
Yeah.
And so these guys again are like, "So do you feel that you have been rehabilitated?" And he's like, "I don't know what that means."
Yeah, I don't think you know what that means.
And he goes and tries to explain it to him. And he was like, "No, I know what it means. I don't think you know what it means." And he was like, "This is, and he just basically calls out that this whole rigmarole is this bullshit. And then he knows he's not going to get out.
Yeah.
And he's like, yeah, I feel bad about what I did. I wish I could go back to that kid because I was a kid at that point and like tell him not to do this, basically like, this is not the way to go.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, of course, because that's just how life is, his parole finally gets accepted.
Yeah. He's like, but whatever you do, I don't really care. I don't really give a damn or whatever. And then, of course, they accept his parole that time. So Red is now back out in the world, and his experiences are very much parallel to that of Brooks. In fact, he even ends up at the same halfway house and sees where Brooks has written up on the ceiling that he was there.
Same job.
He's working at the same grocery, and he like asks the manager to go to the bathroom, and the manager's like, you don't need to ask me every time you need to take a leak. And Red's like, I've been asking somebody to take a leak for
like 40 years or something. Yeah.
So he's sort of feeling despondent and very much in the way that Brooks did.
Yep. But
he thankfully decides to honor Andy's last request, and he goes out to Buxton, Maine, and follows his directions. I gotta say, like, poor Morgan Freeman.
Oh my God.
Andy should have come up with something a little bit easier to do.
A little bit better directions too. Like, I mean, he found it, but it's just like, but it was a real trek.
He's like a 70-year-old man, and he's like walking and miles sweating. And miles, and sweaty. He's in his like suit.
Yeah. That's the thing is like, everyone's always having to wear suits at this time. I just thought like, this is really miserable.
Right. Like, I really felt bad for Red. Too. Like, God, couldn't he have made it a little closer? Like,
nope.
So Red goes off to this spot that Andy has told him to go to by this tree, finds the rock in the rock wall, and underneath it is like a little tin, and inside the tin is a letter and some money.
Yep.
And the letter is basically just like, I'm glad that you had enough hope to follow this to this letter, and I hope that you have a little more in you to continue.
You remember the name of the town.
Yeah, you remember the name of the town, and I can't remember. It's like Guadalajara or something.
I can't pronounce
it. They came up with a pretty difficultly to pronounce name.
I can't pronounce it, but he's basically like, I need a guy who can help me get things done.
And he said one of the things Andy said that he wanted to do is go to this place in Mexico and find an old piece of crap boat and refurbish it and take people out fishing.
Charter fishing. And he also wanted to like open a hotel.
Right. So Red takes the money and he goes and gets himself a bus ticket, and he commits his last crime, which is jumping parole.
Is what he said. He's like, this is my second and only crime I've ever committed.
Right.
Was like breaking my parole by
Right.
leaving the country, obviously, or leaving even the state.
Yes. He breaks his parole, and he's, we see him driving down the road in the bus, and then we see him arrive on a beach, and he finds Andy there working on his boat. And it's interesting because I feel like this last little shot, I bet, was a reshoot. Because I feel like the movie ended when you just see the bus driving away.
Yeah.
But they were like, no, people want to know he got to Mexico. I mean, I don't have a problem with it. I'm just saying it feels like something they added.
It does feel like there's something they added. And, usually this is, I'm somebody who is less is more usually. Yeah. But I do want to see this. Right. I want to see those two friends hug.
Yeah.
And it just gets me in the feels every time.
Right.
Yeah.
It's for a maximum emotional impact. We see them reunited and they hug.
And it's brief. I mean, it's already like, you've pulled back so far. You see them though. Yeah. You see them like see each other, and then they go over and there's just like an embrace, and that's it.
Yeah. But it feels like test audiences were probably like, we want to see them get together again. Because, I feel like the way the voiceover and everything works, it just stops right when you see the bus driving away.
And it would have been fine just with the bus.
It would have been fine.
But for once, I'm here for this what feels to be added on scene.
Yeah, it's certainly not in any way terrible.
No.
But it feels like an add-on.
Yeah, but it feels good.
It feels good. Yes. So, that's the end of Shawshank. If you are a person who is swept up into the emotions of movies, you're probably crying once the credit starts rolling. I noticed you were a little teary
Every time.
even after you've
So
seen this.
many viewings.
Yeah.
No, it gets me every time. This friendship is just so beautiful.
Yes. It's a really nice story about friendship between men.
Yeah, and it's just after, especially because the things that go so wrong with poor Brooks, getting out there, it was like just seeing Morgan Freeman going through this. It was like, no,
Yeah.
no, like, it doesn't have to be like this.
It's a pretty long little last segment,
Yeah.
too, considering, like from the time Andy escapes to the end of the movie, it's probably, I don't know, 15 minutes. Like,
Yeah.
there's probably about 15 minutes of movie.
But
But you need it, definitely.
And it is just, it's so much redemption happening. Like, this film, it just does what you want it to do on so many levels. You get the friendship reunited. You get the evil warden and guard, like, just taken to task. Like, that's just not how life works, It's
Yeah.
just, and it's just so cathartic to see things be the way they should be.
Yes, it's a very satisfying, dramatic, and emotional finale.
And it's not over saccharine, though. It's like,
No.
it's not, it's just done in such a, like, there's other times that something like this could happen and I would be rolling my eyes right out of my head.
Yeah,
But it's just not that with this film.
I agree. I think it's the right amount.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sensitive to that.
Yeah.
I'm pretty cynical, and I chafe when I feel that I'm being manipulated
Yeah.
too heavily by a movie. Like, sometimes Spielberg movies
Yes.
don't work great for me because I'm just like, you know what? You're laying it on too
I
thick.
know what you're doing here, Steve.
Yeah, I feel manipulated. And I mean, this movie's definitely manipulating you, but I think it's doing it effectively. I think
Yes.
there's a reason why it's so beloved, and that's because it's just effective.
Yes.
It's a very well written, well constructed piece of drama.
And well acted, and just, yeah.
Yeah.
It's just the right characters, the right actors playing them. It's just, yeah, it just all works.
It all works really, really well. But it didn't work for the opening weekend when it came out in 1994. Now, what would be your guess as to why?
I have no idea. I honestly don't. I don't remember marketing for this or anything. Do you?
I remember seeing some posters and stuff, but
Sure,
it
but I
definitely
don't-
wasn't big marketing.
Yeah.
I can tell you what I think went wrong in
Okay.
terms of when it came out. I think it hit a bad moment culturally where there were other big things going on, because the big movies that year were Pulp Fiction
Mm-hmm.
and Forrest Gump.
Ugh.
So you've got two totally different types
Polar
of
opposites.
movies that are really drawing a lot of people. Like, you're either a Pulp Fiction person or a Forrest Gump person. It just kind of got lost in the shuffle, like, I think, because I think it came out pretty close to those two, because it was near the end of the year, during awards season or whatever, and those two movies were going strong. Yeah, I think it just kind of got lost in that shuffle. I think that the name of the movie is a problem.
Well, that's what, that's actually, I was reading in the trivia, that's what Morgan Freeman said.
Right. And
He was like, this was a time for people who didn't live through this time. This was before the internet was like
Yeah.
a big thing. So there wasn't a way for Morgan Freeman to, or anyone involved with the film to speak to a wide audience,
Right.
off the cuff about like what was their feelings about why the film wasn't doing well or X, Y, or Z. It just wasn't, there wasn't a way to do that.
Right.
Like there is now, where, he could just go and tweet like, I hate the name.
Right.
So, yeah. But apparently that was something that he had said,
Right.
was he thought the name was what really was hurting like the film.
I agree with him, because if you think about the time, it's in the early 90s. There isn't really an internet. So you see this movie called
Yeah.
The Shawshank Redemption. First of all, Shawshank Prison is not a real prison. It is a construct made up by Stephen King, which appears in
so many stories.
a bunch of stories. And so it's his like fictional Stephen King world prison.
Right. But no one else has a
Right,
reference
but
for
it's
it.
not like Alcatraz Redemption. If you called the movie like The Alcatraz Redemption, people would at least know what Alcatraz was, or
Yeah.
some other famous, I don't know, Leavenworth Redemption.
Sure.
You know what I mean? If you took
Atticus Redemption.
right, if you took a real world prison and said that might have helped a little bit, because then people would be like, oh, it's about a prison. And also, it's about a prison, not exactly a huge genre that people go rushing to with wads of cash in their hand.
Right.
Like, you know, people generally aren't really that into prison movies. If they are, they're into like horrible prison
Right.
exploitation movies.
Yeah.
Prison movies are
or
never
action
big.
films
Right.
or something, you know, like Escape from Alcatraz
Right,
or something like that.
Escape from this prison
Yeah.
or whatever. Yeah, it's just not a setting that makes you think, oh, this is going to be like a feel-good drama. It just wasn't one of those things that was easily marketed. It wasn't the kind of thing that was like a high concept, easy sell elevator pitch. Like, what is the concept of this movie? Guy goes to prison for 30 years and then makes a friend and then gets out. You can't even pitch it.
You just have to see it. Like, you just have
Yeah.
to experience it. And that's what I was saying is, like, I'm like, I don't remember any marketing for this, but like, it's really kind of tough to market.
The poster was just of Tim Robbins
Yeah.
in the rain.
Yeah.
So you've got this movie called Shawshank Redemption, whatever the fuck that means. You got Tim Robbins shirtless in the rain. Like, I love Tim Robbins, but he ain't selling tickets.
No.
You know, so I think it was just a really difficult movie to market effectively. And I think that it was coming out at a time when there were other movies that had big critical buzz that people were going to see.
And oh my God, it opened the same date as Pulp Fiction.
Right.
Just death.
Yeah. It
Death.
just got clobbered.
Yeah, like I just was looking that up right now and it's like the same date as Pulp Fiction.
I can tell you what movie I was paying attention on the day Pulp Fiction opened. Pulp Fiction,
Well,
not
yeah,
this movie.
absolutely.
I remember Pulp Fiction opening. I don't remember Shawshank Redemption opening. So yeah, I mean, that makes sense. It was just sort of badly positioned. It had a name that made no real sense. And it was an idea that was really hard to explain in one sentence to people why they should see it. You just had to see it.
Yeah. And once you see it, you love it.
Right. Which is why it then became the movie it became,
The
because
beloved.
yeah, once people saw it, once that whole need to market it that way was gone, then
No, it had to.
people
It
saw
was totally. It's basically, it was word of mouth.
yeah.
I mean, you know, critics and, you know, but people also just, whoever did go see it
Yeah.
was like, hey,
Like,
this
that
movie's great.
Yeah, this movie's great. You got to see it. And then so everybody did when it came out on rentals.
Which,
And yeah, and they ended up re-releasing it in the theater, I guess, and so it ended up actually making its money back eventually in re-release. So there was a redemption for it.
there was a redemption, a financial redemption.
All right, well, I'm going to go get my rock hammer and my Rita Hayworth poster and crawl through 500 yards of shit.
That sounds delightful. I might just, you know, watch this movie again.
That about does it today for Tentpole Trauma. If you like what you heard, check out our social media presence on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Just look for Tentpole Trauma. That was easy, wasn't it? If you like us, hit subscribe and leave us a sterling review on iTunes, if you dare. If you really like us, head over to patreon.com and get involved in one of our fabulous tiers. You'll be glad you did. Want to communicate with Tentpole Trauma? Send an email to tentpoletrauma@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. And who knows, one day you may even get your email read on one of our shows. Well, thanks for listening, and we'll see you real soon.